Jennifer Aniston revealing her secret struggle to have a baby.
Sometimes women get into marriages, relationships, or however it looks, and they can't have children.
For years, Jennifer Aniston lived under one of Hollywood's cruelest spotlights. Every red carpet appearance, every candid photo, every wrinkle in her shirt was turned into the same question: is she pregnant? The tabloids painted her as the woman who chose fame over family, and that story stuck for more than 20 years. But the truth? None of us really knew what was going on behind the scenes. Now, after decades of silence, Jennifer has finally decided to speak. And what she revealed isn't what anyone expected. It's raw, emotional, and completely different from the headlines we've been fed. So, what really kept Jennifer Aniston from having children? Stick with me, because this story will change everything. To really understand Jennifer Aniston's shocking confession, we have to rewind to the very beginning of Secret Struggle. Becoming America's sweetheart. When Jennifer Aniston first showed up as Rachel Green on Friends in the early 1990s, nobody, not even Jennifer, could have predicted what was about to happen. Overnight, she went from a working actress doing bit parts in sitcoms and failed TV pilots to one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. Friends didn't just become popular, it redefined television. Every Thursday night, tens of millions of people tuned in, and at the heart of that cultural earthquake was Rachel, the spoiled rich girl who learns how to stand on her own. Jennifer's timing, her warmth, and her humor made Rachel feel real. She wasn't the impossibly perfect woman you couldn't relate to. She was messy, funny, insecure, and somehow still cool. And then there was the Rachel haircut. It's hard to explain today just how massive that hairstyle was in the mid-90s. Women around the world brought magazine clippings to salons begging for Jennifer's layered cut. It turned her into more than just a TV star. She was a fashion icon, a lifestyle symbol, and in the eyes of the press, the new America's sweetheart. But here's where the story takes a turn. Being America's sweetheart came with baggage. The very qualities that made Jennifer relatable. The girl-next-door charm, the vulnerability, the warmth, also made people feel like they had a say in her life. And soon, the conversation stopped being about her acting and her career. Instead, it shifted to one question that would haunt her for decades. When is Jennifer going to have kids? The whispers started while Friends was still on the air. Paparazzi zoomed in on her stomach during red carpet events. Magazines printed headlines like Jen's Baby Joy or Jen's Heartbreak, based on nothing more than how loose her blouse was that day. By the final seasons of Friends, every time Jennifer stepped out in public, there was a bump watch. And this wasn't happening to all of her co-stars. Sure, tabloids covered their dating lives, but Jennifer's body became a full-on national obsession. If she had a salad instead of a burger, suddenly there were rumors she was dieting for a pregnancy. If she wore a flowy dress, the next morning's paper suggested she was hiding a baby bump. Imagine living like that. Every move dissected, every outfit turned into proof that you were either expecting or, if not, that something must be wrong. Jennifer later spoke about how this constant speculation wasn't just annoying, it was harmful. It fed into an old, damaging narrative that a woman isn't complete unless she becomes a mother. As she once wrote in an essay, women are still defined primarily by their marital status and whether or not they have reproduced. To her, it was never just about her own life. She saw how this storyline was being pushed onto millions of women watching her. Women who were being told, directly or indirectly, that they were less than if they didn't follow the traditional script. And that's the irony. While Jennifer was breaking barriers in Hollywood, negotiating million-dollar paychecks on Friends, becoming one of the highest-paid actresses in the world, and later proving herself as a serious film star, tabloids reduced her identity to one thing: her womb. But the speculation hit its peak when Jennifer's personal life seemed to line up perfectly with the fantasy people wanted for her. Hollywood's golden couple. In the late 1990s, Jennifer Aniston was already one of television's biggest stars, while Brad Pitt had secured his place as one of Hollywood's most bankable leading men. When their agents decided to set them up in 1998, it wasn't just another celebrity blind date. It was the beginning of a story that the press and public would obsess over for years. Jennifer later described their first night together as effortless, saying it felt like they had known each other forever. Their chemistry was instant and undeniable, and the world got its first glimpse of that connection in 1999, when they stepped onto the red carpet at the Emmy Awards arm in arm, glowing like they had just walked out of a fairy tale. 2 months later, they were back in the headlines when they joined Sting on stage at a New York concert to reveal Jen's sparkling engagement ring. From that moment, America wasn't just watching two stars date. They were watching a love story unfold in real time. Their wedding on July 29, 2000, was pure Hollywood fantasy. And yet, it was kept hidden behind layers of secrecy. Held on a private Malibu estate with sweeping views of the Pacific Ocean, it looked like something out of a dream. Guests arrived to find 50,000 flowers arranged to create what Brad had requested, a Zen-inspired garden paradise. There was a 40-member gospel choir, a live performance from their friend Melissa Etheridge, and a fireworks display that lasted 13 minutes, lighting up the California night sky. To keep it private, the couple even restricted airspace above the venue and required guests to sign confidentiality agreements. Despite all those precautions, the story still leaked out, and when it did, it felt like the world had been invited into their fairy tale. Brad and Jen became the undisputed golden couple of Hollywood, talented, glamorous, and seemingly untouchable. But behind that golden image, there was already a question that wouldn't go away. When would they have a baby? By the early 2000s, the tabloids had turned bump watch into a weekly sport. Every time Jen wore a loose-fitting top or turned down a glass of champagne, the whispers grew louder. In 2002, Jen addressed the speculation herself in an interview, saying she and Brad definitely wanted children, but that it would probably happen after Friends ended. To the public, it sounded like the perfect plan: close one chapter and begin another as parents. But to Jennifer, those words became another cage, locking her into expectations she wasn't sure she could, or even wanted to, fulfill on anyone else's timeline. Then came 2004, the year everything shifted. Brad signed on to film Mr. and Mrs. Smith opposite Angelina Jolie, and their on-screen chemistry was impossible to ignore. Almost immediately, rumors began swirling about what was happening off-set. While Brad insisted that nothing physical happened until after his marriage ended, he later admitted he had fallen in love with Jolie during filming. Courtney Cox, Jennifer's closest friend from Friends, would later confirm that Brad had been honest with Jen about his feelings for Angelina. Still, honesty didn't make the growing distance any easier. The marriage that had once seemed unshakable began to feel fragile under the relentless spotlight. And the tabloids? They were already sharpening their knives. By January 2005, it was over. Jen and Brad released a carefully worded joint statement, explaining that after much consideration, they had decided to formally separate. They pushed back against the idea that anyone else was to blame and insisted the decision was mutual and respectful. But no matter how carefully they tried to control the narrative, the world was hungry for a different story, one with villains and victims. Within weeks, the press had painted Jennifer as the heartbroken wife left behind, and Angelina as the femme fatale who had stolen Brad. The truth was far more complicated than the tabloids would admit, but the damage was done. Suddenly, Jennifer's life was no longer her own. Every magazine cover framed her as the woman who got dumped, and every paparazzi photo became evidence of her supposed loneliness. Worse, the baby question, which had always been whispered in the background, now exploded into a cruel accusation. If Jennifer had given Brad a child, maybe he wouldn't have left. It was an idea that stuck to her like glue. No matter how false it was, and it would shadow her for years to come. That's why the story of their breakup isn't just about a failed marriage. It's about the brutal way Hollywood and the media turned Jennifer Aniston into a character in a drama she never signed up to play. The breakup and the brutal narrative. Hollywood has always loved a simple story. The tabloids, even more so. And when Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt called it quits, the media didn't just cover the breakup. They turned it into a full-blown soap opera. Within weeks of their announcement, a narrative started to form, and it was one that would chase Aniston for years. Pitt was almost immediately linked to Angelina Jolie, his co-star from Mr. and Mrs. Smith. The film had wrapped in 2004, but the chemistry between them lingered in the public imagination. Suddenly, the world had its storyline. Aniston, the glamorous but supposedly child-averse career woman, versus Jolie, who was adopting children and later having biological ones, building a large, multicultural family under the watchful eyes of the press. It was the perfect tabloid contrast, and Jennifer Aniston became the casualty of it. The cruel twist was that this story wasn't just exaggerated, it was completely false. Gossip magazines painted Aniston as the cold careerist who had refused to give Brad a baby. That headline practically became a mantra in the early 2000s. But the truth, as Aniston herself would later reveal, was much more complicated. She and Pitt had, in fact, been trying to start a family during their marriage. Their struggles, which should have remained deeply private, were erased and rewritten as a juicy betrayal narrative. As Aniston would later say, God forbid a woman is successful and doesn't have a child. That one-dimensional storyline, successful but selfish, Jennifer versus nurturing and maternal Angelina, was everywhere. Entertainment magazines, late-night talk shows, and even casual conversations at dinner tables latched onto it. And because it was easier to sell, the truth didn't stand a chance. Aniston herself admitted years later that the coverage felt like a wound that public opinion just kept poking and prodding. She was painted as unlucky in love, left behind, and too focused on Hollywood success to live out what society insisted was every woman's ultimate role: motherhood. By the time her divorce from Pitt was finalized in October of 2005, the frenzy had only gotten louder. Tabloid covers would swing wildly between triumphant declarations like, "Jen finally pregnant," to sympathetic pity, pieces like "Jen's tragic miscarriage." None of it was based on facts. Sometimes it was literally a vacation photo of her in a bikini after lunch, or her absent-mindedly resting a hand on her stomach. That was enough to launch 100 baby bump stories. Aniston herself later joked in frustration that if she could ban one tabloid phrase forever, it would be, "finally pregnant." The endless cycle of false narratives wasn't just exhausting, it was dehumanizing. It followed her into every new relationship she had after Pitt. When she dated Vince Vaughn, her co-star from The Breakup, gossip outlets spun the relationship into a rebound storyline, with headlines already speculating when they would settle down and start a family. When she dated musician John Mayer, the spotlight followed her again, her body once more scrutinized in photos for imagined signs of pregnancy. A little weight gain? Must be a baby. Loose-fitting dress? Definitely a bump. The absurdity of it all was, as Aniston herself later said, both ridiculous and disturbing. But the obsession wasn't just about her. It was bigger than that. Aniston became a stand-in for every woman facing those suffocating societal expectations. The relentless question of when she'd finally become a mom was never just about her personal life. It exposed the way culture still measured women by outdated standards. Married by a certain age, kids shortly after, and ideally a picture-perfect family to seal the deal. By not fitting neatly into that box, Aniston had unwillingly become a mirror that reflected the biases of an entire society. And while she mostly kept quiet through those years, the pressure cooker eventually reached its boiling point. In 2016, she finally decided she wasn't going to stay silent anymore. That summer, she published a raw, no-holds-barred essay in the Huffington Post called For the Record. For the first time, she addressed the years of cruel scrutiny head-on. The essay was her way of fighting back, not just for herself, but for women everywhere who were tired of being told they were incomplete without children or a husband. She wrote bluntly about how damaging the constant bump-watch headlines were, and how offensive it was to define a woman's worth by her womb. With just a few hundred words, Aniston shifted the spotlight away from herself and toward the bigger issue: the toxic tabloid culture that had chewed her up for more than a decade. But here's the thing, even that essay wasn't the whole story. At that point, Aniston was still holding back the real reason she hadn't had kids. The deeply personal truth, one that would silence years of speculation, wouldn't come out until much later. And when she finally revealed it, it wasn't at all what the world expected. For the record, the fight back begins. By the time the year 2016 rolled around, Jennifer Aniston had been living under the weight of false headlines for more than a decade. Every time she stepped outside, whether it was for a red carpet premiere, a coffee run, or even just a vacation with friends, her body, her choices, and her personal life became the property of the tabloids. And finally, she decided enough was enough. That summer, she published a searing essay in the Huffington Post that she called For the Record. It wasn't a publicity stunt, it wasn't tied to a movie release, it was raw, personal, and straight from the heart. The very first line made it clear she was finished playing along with the gossip cycle. For the record, I am not pregnant. What I am is fed up. Those words hit like a thunderclap, especially coming from someone who had mostly stayed silent in the face of years of headlines. In the essay, Jennifer didn't just defend herself, she put the entire tabloid industry on trial. She pointed out how women's bodies had become fair game for endless commentary, how the paparazzi turned private moments into cruel speculation, and how publications made money off of shaming women. She called it a kind of sport-like scrutiny, where her stomach, her figure, or even a loose shirt could spark pregnancy rumors that went viral overnight. But what gave the essay real staying power wasn't just her anger, it was her clarity. She pushed back against the toxic idea that a woman's worth was tied to marriage or motherhood. We are complete with or without a mate, with or without a child, she wrote. It was a line that landed with women everywhere because it wasn't just about Jennifer. It was about every woman who had been asked, "So, when are you going to have kids?" At a family dinner, or judged for putting career first. For once, she wasn't the tabloid version of Jennifer Aniston. She was a voice standing up for millions of women who had felt the same kind of pressure. The impact was immediate. The essay was reprinted, quoted, and dissected across major outlets. Fans flooded social media with messages of support, calling her words a rallying cry and long overdue. Even critics who normally rolled their eyes at celebrity op-eds admitted that Aniston had struck a nerve. For Jennifer, it was more than just a clap back. It was the first time she took back the narrative that had been stolen from her for years. She wasn't the sad, childless ex-wife anymore. She was a woman demanding respect. And yet, beneath that powerful declaration, Jennifer was carrying a private struggle the world didn't know about. A secret struggle. When Jennifer Aniston started dating actor Justin Theroux in 2011, fans thought she had finally stepped into a brand new chapter. Their connection felt refreshing, almost like the Hollywood love story people had been waiting for her to have since the painful end of her marriage to Brad Pitt. The two first crossed paths back in 2007, but sparks really flew in 2010 when they reunited while filming the comedy Wanderlust. Their chemistry on screen wasn't just acting, it was real. By the time they tied the knot in a quiet, intimate ceremony at their Bel Air home in August of 2015, it looked like Aniston had finally found stability. The media, however, refused to let her enjoy that peace. Almost immediately, the Baby Watch headlines came roaring back. Every outing, every outfit, every angle of a paparazzi shot was turned into another wild guess. Was Jennifer finally pregnant? What the world didn't know was that behind the paparazzi flashbulbs and glossy magazine covers, Aniston was fighting an exhausting and heartbreaking private battle. She later revealed that she had been trying to conceive during her late 30s and into her 40s, going through the long, grueling process of in vitro fertilization. These attempts weren't just a passing idea or a half-hearted try. They were years of procedures, hopes built up and then crushed, and the physical toll that comes with IVF. While the public was spinning stories about her choosing career over kids, she was actually pouring her energy, her money, and her emotions into trying to make motherhood happen. And here's the part that makes her story sting even more. This private struggle overlapped with both of her biggest relationships. Her years with Brad Pitt, and later with Justin Theroux. Imagine going through the roller coaster of IVF while the tabloids loudly insisted you didn't want children. The pressure from the outside world was suffocating, but the disappointment from the failed treatments behind closed doors was even heavier. She carried that heartbreak silently, never letting on that the very thing she was being accused of rejecting was the thing she was quietly fighting hardest for. When she and Theroux separated in early 2018, the media rushed to paint it as yet another failed Hollywood romance. But their joint statement made it clear that this wasn't a bitter breakup. They called themselves two best friends who still cherished their bond, even if their marriage couldn't last. And in many ways, Theroux proved that sentiment was genuine. Years later, when Jennifer finally decided to open up publicly about her IVF journey, Theroux didn't add to the noise or let the tabloids spin it into drama. Instead, he quietly dropped a comment on her Instagram post, just a fist bump emoji and a red heart. It was small, almost understated, but it spoke volumes. It was a nod of solidarity, a simple way of saying, "I know what you went through, and I've got your back." Why she never had kids. When Jennifer Aniston finally decided to tell the truth in her December 2022 cover story for Allure magazine, it felt like a cultural moment. For decades, she had been the subject of endless gossip, tabloid headlines, paparazzi snapshots, and whispered speculation. And then, at 53 years old, she finally peeled back the curtain and let the world see what had really been happening all along. She wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for millions of women who had silently lived through the same heartbreak. Jennifer admitted that her journey toward motherhood was not just hard, it was brutal. "It was a challenging road for me, the baby-making road," she said, putting in the simplest words the years of effort, pain, and disappointment that had shaped her private life. Those 7 words carried more weight than 1,000 tabloid covers ever could. She described how, for years, her life revolved around trying everything possible to conceive. In vitro fertilization, IVF, became a central part of her existence. And if you've ever spoken to women who have gone through it, you know it's not just about doctor visits. It's a marathon of hormone injections that mess with your body and your emotions, endless ultrasounds, blood tests, constant monitoring, and the roller coaster of waiting for news that can make or break your spirit. Jennifer went through multiple rounds of this, quietly and without fanfare, all while smiling on red carpets and giving interviews where she was asked about everything except what she was actually going through. And it wasn't just the science she leaned on. She admitted she tried it all, drinking Chinese herbal teas that were supposed to boost fertility, experimenting with alternative therapies, anything that promised even a sliver of hope. "I was throwing everything at it," she confessed. Imagine that level of desperation, when you're willing to chase any possibility, no matter how slim, because the dream of having a child is so deeply rooted. But in her candid admission, one regret stood out above all. She wished someone had told her to freeze her eggs earlier. "I would have given anything if someone had said to me, 'Freeze your eggs, do yourself a favor,'" she admitted. That statement wasn't just personal, it was generational. Jennifer came of age in the 1990s, when conversations about fertility preservation simply weren't happening the way they are today. Back then, most women weren't being told about the option to freeze their eggs in their 30s as a kind of insurance policy. For Jennifer, by the time she started IVF in her late 30s and 40s, biology was working against her. What made her struggle even more painful was the backdrop against which it all played out. While she was going through this intensely private medical journey, the world outside was calling her selfish. Tabloids ran story after story claiming she had chosen career over children, framing her as some kind of cold careerist who didn't want a family. That's the cruelest irony. While she was physically and emotionally drained from trying to become a mother, she was being painted as someone who had never even wanted to try. And Jennifer admitted that she carried this silently for years. She said she felt like she had been in hibernation, protecting her secret, guarding her pain, and quietly enduring one of the hardest chapters of her life. But in that Allure interview, she made it clear. The chapter was closed. "The ship has sailed," she said simply. There was no bitterness in her tone, just acceptance. She explained that she actually felt relief. For years, she had lived with the constant mental torture of maybe, maybe, maybe. Maybe the next round of IVF will work. Maybe this treatment will be the one. Maybe there's still time. But once she accepted the finality of it, she said she felt lighter, like she could finally stop living in that endless cycle of hope and disappointment. And here's the powerful twist. Jennifer said she now has 0 regrets. That's not a phrase you expect from someone who went through so much loss and longing, but for her, it made sense. She explained that going through that hard SHT shaped her. It carved her into the woman she was meant to be. And this wasn't about bitterness or denial. It was about owning her story and redefining what a fulfilling life looks like. For Jennifer, motherhood didn't happen. But that didn't mean her life was incomplete. In fact, she insists, it's richer and more satisfying than ever. So where does that energy go now? Into her passions. And if you've followed Jennifer's career after Friends, you know she hasn't slowed down. One of her biggest outlets has been her production company, Echo Films, which she co-founded with her longtime friend Kristen Hahn back in 2008. The name wasn't chosen lightly. Jennifer explained that they wanted the company to echo back an idea, a challenge, something that resonates through all of us. And that's exactly what they've done. Echo Films has been behind some of her most daring work, like Cake, where she played a woman living with chronic pain, a performance that earned her critical acclaim. Dumplin', a heartfelt comedy drama that celebrated body positivity. And of course, The Morning Show, the hit series where she plays Alex Levy, a news anchor navigating power, gender politics, and personal demons. The Morning Show, in particular, has been transformative for Jennifer's career. It's not just a role, it's a statement. The show tackles sexism, toxic workplaces, and the cost of ambition, themes that resonate strongly with her own life experiences. It's won awards, sparked conversation, and reminded Hollywood that Jennifer isn't just America's sweetheart. She's a serious actress with range and vision. But producing isn't her only focus. In 2021, Jennifer stepped into a whole new world: entrepreneurship. She launched Lola V, her own hair care brand. And if you've ever wondered about the name, Lola is meant to embody a confident woman who lives life her own way. Pretty fitting, right? The brand reflects Jennifer's personal journey toward wellness and authenticity. Lola VA products are plant-based, cruelty-free, and designed with sustainability in mind. To her, it's not just about selling shampoo, it's about promoting a philosophy of self-care and empowerment, showing women that beauty and strength come in many forms. All of this, the films, the shows, the businesses, is part of how Jennifer redefined herself after the heartbreak of IVF. Instead of being defined by what she didn't have, she chose to build a life filled with what she could create. And that choice has made her not just a survivor, but a role model. She's proof that happiness doesn't have one definition. And here's the irony. For decades, the world wanted one story from Jennifer Aniston, the story of her becoming a mother. But the story she ended up giving us is so much more interesting, so much more powerful. It's a story about resilience, about defying the world's expectations, and about finding peace on your own terms. So, why didn't Jennifer Aniston ever have kids? The answer isn't simple, and it isn't the one the tabloids screamed at us for years. The truth is harder, more human, and infinitely more inspiring. And maybe, just maybe, that's why Jennifer finally told it. Not because she owed anyone an explanation, but because it might free someone else from the same silent struggle. Thanks for watching, fam. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Check out the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.